My name is Abigail. I am 25 years old, and yesterday, I became a wife. My life, up until this point, has felt like a series of quiet preparations for a future I was only just beginning to map out. I work as an assistant interior designer in Port Blossom, a city that hugs the Oregon coast, perpetually misted by the sea and scented with pine and damp earth. It's a gentle place, a city of rose gardens and craft breweries, where people walk instead of rush. It suits me. It's here that I met Liam, 4 years ago to the day. He's a landscape architect, a man who finds poetry in the slope of a hill and the resilience of a wildflower. Our love has been like the gardens he designs, patient, deliberate, and cultivated to bloom in its own time. Yesterday, on our 4th anniversary, we were married in the backyard of the small craftsman-style house we'd bought a year ago. It wasn't a grand affair. We had 50 guests, a string quartet of local music students, and catering from a little downtown bistro called the Gilded Spoon. The whole event was a tapestry woven from threads of our life here. Liam had spent months coaxing our garden into a spectacle of lavender, delphiniums, and rambling roses. I had designed the layout, arranging vintage tables and chairs under the broad arms of an old maple tree, hanging strings of fairy lights that promised to cast a warm, golden glow as dusk fell. It was small, intimate, and so deeply, personally us. The date was immovable, a symbol of our journey. Rescheduling wasn't just impractical, it would have felt like a betrayal of the quiet, steady rhythm of our love. But a shadow had fallen over the day, a familiar silhouette that had long cast its gloom over my brightest moments. My father was not there. He had called a week prior, his voice strained with a manufactured urgency. "Abby, honey, there's been a bit of a medical thing," he'd started, a classic preamble to a letdown. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, a defensive bracing I'd learned in childhood. I pressed, my voice calmer than I felt. The medical thing, it turned out, was a conveniently vague checkup that couldn't possibly be moved. I knew, with the weary certainty of a lifetime of experience, that this wasn't the truth. My brother, Ethan, was in town from London on his one, hallowed 3-week visit of the year. Finally, after my quiet, persistent questioning, the real story emerged, tumbling out in a rush of justifications. Ethan had, on a whim, decided to organize a camping trip to the Three Sisters Wilderness. An epic boys-only adventure. A chance for father and son to reconnect with the wild. "You know how rarely I get to see him, Abby," my father had pleaded, his voice thin with the effort of sounding reasonable. It's this weekend or never. You and Liam can just shift the wedding, can't you? It's a small party. A few calls to the vendors let the guests know. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. The words landed like stones in the pit of my stomach. My wedding. The culmination of 4 years of love, a day I had poured my heart into, dismissed as a minor inconvenience. A scheduling conflict to be resolved in favor of my brother's fleeting whims. It wasn't just a choice between a wedding and a camping trip, it was a choice between his son and his daughter. And as always, he had chosen Ethan. In the end, it was my stepfather, David, who walked me down the aisle of soft green grass, his arm a sturdy, comforting presence in mine. The moment was a complicated cocktail of emotions, immense gratitude for this kind, gentle man who had loved my mother so completely, and a profound, aching sadness for the man who should have been there. Later, as the evening softened into a velvety blue, and the fairy lights flickered to life, my father arrived. He had driven back early, his face etched with exhaustion and a dawning horror. My cousin, a budding photographer, had sent him a few candid shots from the ceremony. He stood by the dessert table, phone in his hand, looking at a picture of David smiling down at me, my hand tucked into his arm. And he wept. Not quiet, dignified tears, but the shuddering, ragged sobs of a man who has just understood the true weight of his own choices. That heart-wrenching conversation, held in the quiet corner of a garden filled with the joyful sounds of my new life, ended with a desperate plea. "Let's do it again, Abby," he choked out, his eyes red and swollen. "Just a small thing. Tomorrow. I need to walk you down the aisle. I need a chance to fix this." And so, my wedding day, a day that should have been a pure, untroubled note of happiness, became a bittersweet symphony, tinged with the familiar, sorrowful melody of my family's discordant history. The complex interplay of preference and priority, of love given and love withheld, was laid bare under the soft glow of the party lights, reminding me that even the most beautiful beginnings can be haunted by the ghosts of the past. Growing up in my father's house felt like living in the shadow of a monument. The monument was my brother Ethan. He was 2 years older, and from as early as I can remember, he was the sun around which our small family galaxy revolved. He was naturally gifted at everything he tried: sports, music, academics. But these talents were not worn with humility. They were a mantle of arrogance he draped around himself, a constant reminder of his own perceived greatness. The unending praise he received from our father was the air that inflated his ego. He moved through the world with the brash, unshakable confidence of someone who has never been told he is anything less than a gift to humanity. For me, this meant a childhood spent navigating his moods, his casual cruelties, his need to be the center of every room. He wasn't just a difficult sibling, he was a bully. He would mock my drawings, trip me in the hallway, and belittle my friends with a sharp, cutting wit that left them stung and confused. When he left for college on the East Coast, a profound silence fell over the house. It wasn't an empty silence, it was a peaceful one. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe. The fractures in our family ran deeper than sibling rivalry. My parents' marriage was a long, slow exercise in disillusionment. They divorced when I was in middle school, a rupture triggered by my mother's affair with an old college friend, David. To the outside world, the split was a shock. But I had lived inside the walls of their unhappiness for years. I saw the polite, brittle smiles they wore at school functions and holiday dinners, a facade that would crumble the moment we were home. In the evenings, the house was a cavern of unspoken resentments. They were roommates who shared children, not partners who shared a life. They slept in separate rooms, their paths crossing in the kitchen with the strained courtesy of strangers. My father's drinking had worsened in the years leading up to the end. The scent of whiskey on his breath became a frequent, unwelcome guest at the dinner table, often a prelude to the muffled, angry arguments that would seep through my bedroom walls late at night. The day my mother, Eleanor, finally told him about David, her confession was less a bombshell and more a final, weary sigh. She packed a bag and moved out, leaving behind a silence that was heavier and more charged than any of their fights. She tried to stay in our lives, calling us, inviting us for weekend visits. I went. I missed her quiet strength, her gentle hands, the way she could see the person I was, not just the person she wanted me to be. Ethan, however, refused. His bond with our father was absolute. In his black and white world, our mother was a traitor, and David was the enemy. He couldn't forgive her, and my father, wrapped in his own cloak of betrayal and pain, never encouraged him to. My choice to maintain a relationship with my mother and eventually, to grow fond of David, became a new point of contention between my father and me. It was a quiet alienation. He never forbade me from seeing her, but my weekends away were met with a cool distance when I returned. It felt as if I, too, had betrayed him by not choosing a side, by not mirroring Ethan's righteous anger. Ethan, for his part, made his allegiance clear, openly deriding our mother and her replacement husband, in a way that always seemed calculated to earn our father's approval. I chose a different path, a tightrope walk of diplomacy, trying to hold on to both halves of my fractured family. A few months after the divorce was finalized, I stood in a sun-drenched garden, wearing a pale blue bridesmaid dress, and watched my mother marry David. Ethan, true to his word, was not there. The shared custody arrangement meant he was still forced to spend half of every month at my mother's new home, an arrangement he endured with sullen, resentful silence. It was a difficult adjustment for him. In my mother and David's home, there was no golden child. They treated us with an even-handed affection that Ethan, accustomed to being the center of attention, read as neglect. He acted out, his behavior growing more sullen and defiant. My father, convinced that Ethan was being mistreated, launched several misguided attempts to gain full custody. He told the courts that my mother's new life was unstable, that David was a poor influence. But his claims were hollow, born of hurt rather than fact, and they were ultimately dismissed. I was secretly relieved. My mother was a good mother, and David, a quiet, thoughtful man who taught literature at the local community college, was nothing but kind to me. He never tried to be my father. He was simply David, a steady, calm presence in the storm. As a young teenager, I was torn. My mother's affair had broken our family, a fact I couldn't ignore. But as the years passed, I made a conscious choice. I chose to prioritize my own happiness, which meant accepting the complexity of the situation and holding on to the mother who loved me, flaws and all. It was a choice that became invaluable when we lost her to ovarian cancer 4 years ago. The diagnosis was swift and brutal, and her decline was mercifully short. I cherished those last months, the hours spent reading to her, the long, rambling conversations, the simple act of holding her hand. Her love for me, in the end, was the most uncomplicated thing in my life. Ethan, living his high-powered life in London, barely visited. He made it back for the last few days, a strained, awkward presence by her bedside. I think, in some small way, his being there brought her a sliver of peace. After my mother died, David sold the house and moved to Arizona to be closer to his sister. We stayed in touch, our connection forged in shared love and shared loss. A year later, Ethan's finance job took him to London permanently. His absence was a strange, quiet gift. Without Ethan as a constant point of comparison, the dynamic between my father and me began to shift. One evening, about 2 years ago, he apologized. We were sitting on his back porch, watching the sun set, a glass of iced tea sweating in my hand. He told me he knew he'd been distant after the divorce, that my mother's betrayal had made him bitter and walled off. He admitted, for the first time, that he had played favorites with Ethan, that he saw now how much it must have hurt me. "I want to do better, Abby," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to be a better father to you." And he tried. He truly did. Over the next 2 years, our relationship began to heal. We had weekly dinners. He'd call just to chat. He took an interest in my work, in my life with Liam. The change was so profound, so welcome, that when Liam proposed, asking my father to walk me down the aisle felt like the most natural thing in the world. He had wept when I asked, a gesture that felt like the final brick being laid in the bridge we had built between us. I knew Ethan would always hold a different, perhaps more revered, place in his heart, but he had shown me a love and care that felt real. He had convinced me that our new, fragile bond was strong enough to lean on. But the phone call about the camping trip shattered that illusion. It was a stark, painful reminder that no matter how much effort he made in Ethan's absence, the moment my brother reappeared, I would be relegated back to my old position, a secondary concern, an afterthought. My existence, my importance, seemed to be conditional, valid only when his son wasn't around. The foundation I thought we had built was nothing more than a temporary structure, easily dismantled for a more exciting project. The hurt was sharp and immediate. As soon as I hung up the phone with him, my hands trembling, I called David. My reaction was a flash fire of pain and a primal need for an immediate bomb. It was part revenge, I admit that now, but in that moment, it felt like pure, unadulterated self-preservation. I was choosing someone who would choose me back. "David," I'd said, my voice shaking slightly, "I have a question for you." I pictured him in his small, sun-baked Arizona home, surrounded by books and the quiet dignity that always defined him. He had been a rock for me during my mother's funeral, holding me up when my own father was lost in a fog of his own grief. We didn't talk often, but our bond felt deep and unspoken. He hesitated, of course. He knew my father would be there. He didn't want to cause more drama in a family already rife with it. But I insisted, telling him how much it would mean to me, to my mother's memory. After a long pause, he quietly agreed. "It would be my honor, Abigail." In the days leading up to the wedding, my father grew distant again, his attention wholly consumed by Ethan's visit. The weekly dinner was cancelled. His calls stopped. The familiar chill returned. On the morning of my wedding, as I stood in my bedroom looking out at the garden Liam and I had so lovingly created, the pain of his absence was a dull, constant ache. It was expected, and yet a small, foolish part of me had held out hope that he would show up at the last minute, that he would make the right choice. He didn't. And so David, in his handsome gray suit, his eyes shining with a gentle pride, walked me through the rose arch and down the aisle. It was a moment of profound joy, a joy made all the more poignant by the bitter taste of disappointment that lingered beneath it. The party was winding down. The string quartet had packed up, replaced by a softly curated playlist humming from a small speaker. Guests were beginning to say their goodbyes, their faces flushed with wine and happiness. Liam's arm was a warm, steady presence around my waist. In a moment of quiet, surrounded by the debris of a beautiful day, empty glasses, plates with crumbs of cake, fallen rose petals, I pulled out my phone. My cousin had been sending me photos throughout the day. I scrolled to my favorite one, a shot of David and me at the head of the aisle. He is looking at me, his face a perfect picture of paternal love. I am looking at Liam, my expression full of a hope so pure it almost hurts to see. Without thinking too much about it, I sent it to my father. No text, just the image. A quiet testament to the moment he had chosen to miss. For hours there was silence. I tried to push it from my mind, to immerse myself in the glow of my wedding night. Then, just as the last of our friends were drifting away, a car pulled up, its headlights cutting through the twilight. My father stumbled out. He looked like he'd been through a war. His clothes were rumpled and smelled faintly of campfire smoke, his face was smudged with dirt, and his eyes were wide with a frantic energy. He saw me and Liam standing by the maple tree and almost ran towards us. "Abby, I'm so sorry," he gasped, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. "I was a fool. An idiot." He held up his phone, the picture of me and David glowing on the screen. "When I saw this, I realized what I'd done." He explained that he and Ethan had been deep in the wilderness, with no cell service. They had only just gotten back into range an hour ago. The moment he saw the photo, he said, he'd thrown their gear in the truck and started driving, leaving Ethan to pack up the rest of the campsite alone. "We can fix this," he said, grabbing my hands. His were cold and trembling. "We can do it tomorrow. Just us, Liam, a few people. I'll rent a chapel. I'll do anything. I need to be the one to give you away, Abby. Please." His desperation was a raw, gaping wound. It was everything I had wanted to hear, and yet, something felt wrong. A small, cold knot of suspicion tightened in my gut. I looked at him, at his tear-streaked face, his utter devastation, and I saw the truth of it. His regret wasn't for me, not really. It wasn't about missing his daughter's wedding. It was about seeing another man standing in his place. "Would you be this upset if I had walked down the aisle alone?" I asked, my voice quiet. He hesitated. It was only for a second, but it was enough. The flicker of confusion in his eyes before he could rearrange his features into a mask of paternal anguish told me everything I needed to know. His pain wasn't born of love for me, but of pride. He hadn't been replaced by an empty space. He had been replaced by David, my mother's husband, the man he had always seen as his rival. His sudden, desperate need to fix it was about reclaiming his territory, about outshining my stepfather, not about celebrating my marriage. A profound, weary sadness settled over me. "No, Dad," I said, gently pulling my hands away. "We're not having another wedding. You had your chance." His face crumpled. "But I didn't realize," he cried, his voice breaking. "I didn't understand how much it meant until I saw the pictures. Ethan and we rushed back as soon as we could. I'm glad you're here now," I said, my voice even. "But this day is about me and Liam. I'm not going to spend the rest of my wedding night soothing your regret. I need to go inside." His sorrow curdled into anger. "How can you be so heartless?" he spat, the words laced with the familiar sting of his disappointment in me. The accusation, which once would have shattered me, barely made a dent. A strange calm had settled in my bones. Heartless? I repeated, the word tasting foreign on my tongue. I have spent my entire life making excuses for you, Dad. Forgiving you for 1,000 little hurts that you never even noticed you were inflicting. This time, there's no excuse. This was a choice. You chose a camping trip over my wedding. My stepdad, I said, the word feeling solid and true, may not be my blood, but he shows up. He cares about my happiness, not just about how he looks in the family portrait. I turned and walked back towards the warm light of my new home, leaving him standing in the encroaching darkness. Liam's hand found mine, his silent support a comforting anchor. Behind us, I could hear Ethan's car pulling up. I didn't look back. I closed the door on their drama, on my father's tears, and on a part of my life I was finally ready to leave behind. Time has a way of softening the sharp edges of a painful memory, but the events of my wedding night remain in stark, clear focus. In the days that followed, a part of me, the part conditioned to seek his approval, felt a pang of remorse for my harsh words, for the image of his crumpled face as I walked away. But that pang was quickly overtaken by a quiet, steady sense of rightness. Seeing David's calm, proud face in my wedding photos brings me a comfort that is pure and uncomplicated. His presence wasn't a strategic move, it was an act of love. My father's actions were a culmination of a lifetime of casual disregard. I had spent years building little psychological shelters to protect myself from his favoritism, making excuses for him to myself and to others. He's just stressed. He doesn't mean it. That's just how he is with Ethan. But I am 25 years old, a wife, a woman building her own life. The well of excuses has finally run dry. His behavior was not just a mistake, it was a clear statement of his priorities. And I am no longer obligated to accept it, or to forgive it on his timeline. It hurt to see him so upset. Of course it did. He is my father. But everyone has a breaking point, and I had finally, quietly, reached mine. For years I had swallowed my tears, presenting a stoic, untroubled face to the world. He never saw the lonely nights I cried as a teenager, feeling invisible in my own home. I doubt, even now, that he could truly comprehend the depth of that childhood pain. And if he can't understand the cause, how can he truly be sorry for the effect? I talked it all through with Liam, who held me and listened, his support unwavering. "This is your decision to make, Abby," he'd said. "Whatever you choose, I'm with you." I also called David, my voice thick with unshed tears, worried that I had used him, that he had been a pawn in my complicated psychodrama with my father. He was, as always, gracious and understanding. "Abigail," he said, his voice gentle over the phone, "I was not a pawn. I was there because I love you, and I was honored to be asked. Our relationship stands on its own. It has nothing to do with your father." His words were a balm, easing a guilt I hadn't even realized I was carrying. It has been a few days since the wedding. My father has tried to reach me. The screen of my phone has lit up with his name multiple times a day. He has left voicemails and sent long, rambling texts. I have not listened to them. I have not read them. Our honeymoon is tomorrow. Liam and I are flying to the San Juan Islands, to a small, secluded cabin overlooking the water. I want to enter that sacred, quiet time with a clear mind and a peaceful heart. I want to focus on the man who chose me, on the future we are building together, free from the static of the past. This morning, his name flashed on my screen again as Liam and I were packing. I ignored it. Later, while Liam was loading the car, I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over his message thread. For a moment, I was tempted. But then I looked out the window at the life I have now, at the steady, uncomplicated love that fills it. I put the phone down, screen off. I can choose peace. And today I am. The calls continued daily, usually in the evening, after he must have finished work. I'd see his name pop up and a familiar, weary sigh would escape my lips before I silenced the call. I held to my promise to myself. I didn't read the messages. Not until today. With our honeymoon behind us and the rhythm of normal life about to resume, it felt like a loose thread I needed to address before I could properly move on. Sitting on our sofa, a mug of tea warming my hands, I opened the message thread. It was a long, scrolling history of one-sided communication. The messages all said the same thing, dressed in different clothes. I'm so sorry, Abby. I was wrong. I want to fix this. He wrote that he had been a terrible father, that he had taken me for granted, that his regret was a physical weight he carried every moment. He acknowledged his favoritism of Ethan, admitting it was a pattern he was ashamed of and that he understood, finally, why I was so hurt. He said I was his only daughter, and the thought of losing me was unbearable. He would do anything, wait as long as it took, for a chance to earn my forgiveness. Reading his words was like pressing on a deep bruise. It ached. The raw sincerity in them was undeniable, but it was tangled up with so much history, so much pain. My decision, however, had already been made in the quiet moments of my honeymoon, watching the tide ebb and flow. I needed distance. So, after taking a deep breath, I called him. He answered on the first ring. Abby? Oh, Abby, I'm so... I cut him off, my voice gentle but firm. Dad, I'm home. I'm calling to ask you for something. I could hear the hope in his silence. I need you to stop calling. And stop texting. For a while. He started to protest, but I continued. Hearing you apologize over and over again doesn't change what happened. It just keeps the wound fresh. It makes me feel like your peace of mind is more important than mine right now. I read your messages. I know you're sorry. But I need time. I will call you when I'm ready to talk. I don't know if that will be in a week or a month or longer. But it has to be on my terms. Until then, I need space. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, he had managed to smooth the hurt from his voice. Okay, Abby, he said, his tone subdued. Okay. I understand. I'll wait for your call. Thank you, I said, and ended the call. A sense of quiet relief washed over me. The boundary had been set. Now, the healing could begin. The first 3 days of our honeymoon were a blissful, restorative blur of sea air, long walks, and quiet companionship. My father, true to his word, had been silent. The peace was a gift. Then, on the 4th morning, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but some premonition made me answer. Finally, a familiar clipped voice said, Ethan. My first instinct was to hang up. Don't you dare, he snapped, as if reading my mind. He must have known I'd blocked his number, and had resorted to a burner phone. The sheer audacity of it was so typical, it almost made me laugh. You can't just run away from your problems, Abigail. That's what kept me on the line. The accusation, so profoundly wrong, sparked a flicker of fight in me. He launched into a lecture, his voice dripping with the self-righteousness I knew so well. He talked about family, about duty, about the way I was tearing everyone apart with my selfishness. You owe Dad an apology, he demanded. You've made his life a misery. You ruined my visit home. The camping trip was cut short. Everyone's walking on eggshells because of you. This is between me and Dad, Ethan, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me, he shot back. You've always been like this, jealous of my relationship with him. The accusation was so juvenile, so utterly baseless, that it broke the spell of his anger. All I felt was a sudden, piercing wave of pity for him. Jealous? I said, and this time, I did laugh, a short, humorless sound. Oh, Ethan. I'm not jealous of you. I feel sorry for you. You're a successful man, you have a big career in a big city, but you are emotionally stuck at age 17. You're still fighting for Dad's approval, still seeing everything as a competition. You can't stand at that for once, something isn't about you. Before he could formulate a retort, I continued, my voice calm and clear. The fact that you would buy a burner phone to call me on my honeymoon to tell me off only proves my point. your life seems to be a constant state of agitation and misery. You should really think about that. I didn't wait for his response. I ended the call and blocked the number. The satisfaction I felt was sharp and clean. It wasn't about winning an argument. It was the feeling of taking a deep, clean breath after being in a stuffy, toxic room for far too long. I had not been drawn into his drama. I had simply observed it, named it, and walked away. I had reclaimed my peace. Returning from the San Juan Islands was like waking from a beautiful dream. The misty, pine-scented air was replaced by the familiar routines of work and home life. Liam went back to his drafting table, and I returned to my swatches and floor plans. The bubble of newlywed bliss had not burst, but it had settled, becoming a part of the landscape of our everyday life. And with that settling came the quiet understanding that it was time. Time to face the unresolved chords of my past. A few days after we returned, I drove to my father's house after work. I didn't call first. I needed the element of surprise to be on my side, to prevent him from preparing a speech or, worse, running away. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Ethan's rental car parked by the curb. A knot of frustration tightened in my stomach. Of course, he was still here, his visit extended by the drama. For a moment, I considered turning around, but I had come with a purpose. I was not going to let my brother derail me. They were both in the living room, the television murmuring in the background. My father's face lit up with a fragile hope when he saw me, while Ethan's hardened into a familiar scowl. "I'm not here to see you," I said to my brother, my tone polite but firm. "I need to speak to Dad. Alone." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but my father, looking from my resolute face to his son's, held up a hand. "It's all right, Ethan. Give us a minute." After a moment of stony silence, my brother got up and walked out to the back porch, closing the sliding glass door with a little too much force. Alone with my father, I sat in the armchair opposite him. The silence was heavy with everything unsaid. "I came here to tell you how I feel," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "For the last few years, I thought we were building something real. Our relationship was better than it had ever been. That's why I asked you to walk me down the aisle. It meant everything to me." I looked at him directly, forcing him to meet my gaze. "When you asked me to postpone my wedding for a camping trip, you showed me exactly where I stand. And it's the same place I've always stood, second to Ethan. It broke my heart. Asking David to walk me down the aisle wasn't about hurting you. It was about having someone by my side who I knew, without a doubt, would be proud to be there. He is an important part of my life. He was my mother's husband, and he is my friend." I paused, letting the words sink in. "I don't know if you were absent on my wedding day because you were truly busy, or because you couldn't stand the thought of being in the same space as David, or if you just didn't think it mattered that much. And honestly, the reason doesn't change the outcome." He looked utterly broken, his face pale, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He started to apologize again, a fresh wave of regret washing over him. I know, I was wrong, Abby. It was the biggest mistake of my life. Dwelling on it won't help either of us," I said, and saw a flicker of relief in his eyes. He thought this was the part where I would say, "It's okay, I forgive you." But I had learned too much to offer such easy absolution. "I know some people would expect me to cut you out of my life completely," I continued softly. "But I don't want to do that. I lost my mother. I know how quickly people can be taken from us. You haven't always been a perfect father, but you are my father. And we've had good moments. I don't want to throw those away." I saw the tears welling in his eyes. "But I can't just forget this," I said, and this was the most important part. "I am willing to give you a chance to build something new with me. But it has to be on new terms. I need space. Real space. I can't tell you if it will take weeks, or months, or even years for me to feel truly ready to rebuild this. But when I feel like I can think about our relationship without this ache in my chest, I will reach out. Until then, I need our contact to be minimal. I need to heal." He nodded slowly, the tears finally spilling over and tracing paths down his cheeks. He understood. He didn't argue or plead. He just accepted it. Can I hug you?" he asked, his voice a raw whisper. I stood up and walked to him. We embraced, a brief, tight, emotional hug that held a lifetime of complicated love. I held my own tears in check, a dam of resolve holding them back. I walked out of the house, past the closed glass door where my brother was still sulking, and got into my car. It was only when I was alone, the engine running, that the dam finally broke. The tears came, not of anger or sadness, but of release. I was crying for the little girl who felt invisible, and for the woman who had finally learned how to be seen. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, I felt like I was the one holding the map.